Welcome to the Caffeine Stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
Alright, hello everyone, welcome to the 16th episode of the Caffeine Stream. My name is C.B. Robertson, and today I hope won't sound too redundant with the previous episode, namely the one on utilitarianism and, peripherally, Sam Harris. We're going to be talking about morality again today. I've been poking hornets' nests with Christians for decades now, really, but even as a Christian back in the day. But I think it's, rather than delve into the behavioral economics and transhumanism that I want to get into, but still have some research to do, I thought I'd knock this one out just because it's so sort of congruent with and follows from the utilitarianism conversation. So I'll start it off with a question, one people maybe heard before. Can you be moral without God? Or let's steel man a little bit. Can you be rational in your morality without God? As they say. William Lane Craig used to say in his debates with people like Hitchens and Sam Harris, I appreciate that non-Christians can be moral and can act with a moral compass, but they have no reason to be moral. There's no objective standard that justifies their moral behavior. And as Andrew Clavin would say, the only real rational position for the non-Christian is Marquis de Sade. It's like, okay, dude. But I mean, it's still an argument worth taking seriously. William Lane Craig, if not Andrew Clavin, is a serious person. And of course, a very serious person, which is C.S. Lewis, someone for whom I have tremendous respect and recommend everyone, Christian and non-Christian alike, read, also ties morality in with God. Indeed, this is how he opens Mere Christianity, with the observation of our universal tendency as humans to appeal to transcendent moral standards in our bickering with each other. So how can you have morality without a transcendent objective source like that? Is it possible? As anyone who listened to the Sam Harris podcast should be able to guess, the short answer is yes, you can. This is actually the exact same problem Sam Harris is running into, just through a sort of metaphysical branch of divine command theory instead of utilitarianism. Sam Harris, for those of you who didn't know, who I was kind of going off on a few episodes back, said, if you're talking about morality as something other than the possible changes in conscious experience, I don't know what you're talking about. And this is, of course, someone with a master's degree in philosophy who is apparently unfamiliar with deontology or virtue ethics or divine command theory or nihilism. So, there are these other theories, and the same is true with Christianity. And this sort of moral ontological argument that Christians are making about the necessity of God for morality. In fact, there is a very long history of morality defined in terms of right action in pursuit of the good. It's a very loose, off-the-cuff definition I just gave there, but I think it's functional enough. This podcast is not, I don't want to repeat the utilitarianism too much, so I'm not just going to be attacking this Christian moral ontological position, which I want to say is not an attack on Christianity. I will do that at another time, as I have previously. But here I actually want to defend what I'm going to call authentic Christianity from this kind of autism. We are going to be talking about autism here, and I don't mean that in the internet meme sense. I mean this in the clinical sense. Autism has totally infiltrated and taken over Western morality, not just with Christianity. And I'm going to bring Jonathan Haidt in for this shortly. But let's go over some of the basic, before we do that, let's go over some of the basic counter-arguments. So, virtue ethics obviously doesn't require God to, and not even God in the abstract sense. This argument, this whole debate about morality and God is so often just permeated with equivocation, where God means one thing in one context and something else in another. Morality means right action in one context, but the necessary logical grounds for the possibility of morality in another. And these, you have to keep a very, and it will mean either of those two things in, contexts A and B, and then the possibility for enforcing it in situation C, which is a completely different matter. Enforcement is a matter of law, not morality. Law and morality are separate. Hopefully they overlap a fair bit. In a just society, you would expect morality and law to be, have some relationship with each other. But that relationship is not ontological. That relationship is not intrinsic to either one. You can have immoral laws and you can have illegal moral action. They don't derive one from the other. Law is another one that gets equivocated a lot. Man's law versus God's law, and so forth. So you have to be very careful of the equivocations. It's very common, for example, to hear people say, well, God is goodness itself. God is not, one good thing among many, as Bishop Robert Barron says, but goodness itself is not the pinnacle of beauty, but beauty itself. Therefore, all expressions of beauty are God. All expressions of goodness are God. And so, of course, to have morality without God is like an oxymoron. Saying you have to have God to have morality becomes a tautology. But that's just a language game. It's just defining your way into things. And of course, in this view, it would be impossible to be an atheist, because anyone who has a sense of the good is a believer in God by definition. So the Christian, by berating the unbeliever, isn't adding anything in that case. And this takes you to all kinds of silly places. Andrew Clavin, as I mentioned before, said, the only rational position for an unbeliever is the Marquis de Sade, which is this sort of nihilistic sadomasochism, and it's like a straw man built upon an equivocation. It's worse than either one independently, because first you equivocate definitions of God, and then you straw man the unbeliever by saying, well, you believe there's no goodness at all because you've denied God, which is goodness. And so you must believe this thing. And the other person's like, I don't know what you're talking about. What? So anyways, you have to be very, very careful with the equivocations and the word games here, and to remember the senses of the terms, whether that's truth or goodness or morality or law or God, that are being used, and not interchange them, because there are so many thick words that get thrown around in this argument. And so anyways, I don't want to spend more time on that. I'm sure that'll come up in future episodes on Christianity. So let's get down into autism. Jonathan Haidt was at a conference recently and delivered this speech called A New Science of Morality. It's a phenomenal speech, 27 minutes long, that I'm going to link to in the description here. Everyone should read it. But the one of the critical things he points out is that right around the time of the Industrial Revolution, things started getting different. Society started changing. And some people were beginning to wonder if perhaps we needed new rules for governing how to relate to each other in this new and changing society. And this feeling of everything's different opened up new ways of thinking in the world of morality. I would argue this openness was not a good thing, retrospectively, but it was interesting at the time, and I think it remains interesting today, even if it was a bad idea. And so, who should step into the spotlight? But Jonathan Haidt points out two philosophers, namely Jeremy Bentham, the author of Utilitarianism, not its best author, but its first, and Immanuel Kant, the creator of Transcendentalism or Deontology, so duty ethics. Now, what Haidt pointed out in his speech was that both of these moral philosophers had Asperger's syndrome. Jeremy Bentham, this is basically absolutely certain. He had this funny quote about John Stuart Mill saying he had no sympathy whatsoever for the most basic, feelings that drove the rest of mankind. He just completely lacked the creative imagination to put himself in someone else's shoes. Immanuel Kant, Jonathan Haidt. For those of you who don't know, Jonathan Haidt is I will say a moral psychologist. He's the creator of the foundations theory of morality. He studies psychology and politics. He's the go-to guy for this subject, and he does very good work, in my opinion. So anyways, Jeremy Bentham, very autistic. Immanuel Kant, there are some historians who are quite certain he had Asperger's. Haidt is uncertain, is less willing to diagnose him retrospectively, but says he was probably pretty close. He was like on the spectrum. And here, what we mean by autism or Asperger's feels more personal. Autism feels more general. You could describe a theory as autistic, but a theory can't have Asperger's. Anyways, what that means is, in terms of personality, low in empathy and high in systematizing. You could think of it as a graph, and Haidt described autism as the bottom right corner of the bottom right quadrant. Low on the empathy scale, very far right on the systematizing versus intuitive. And so his view is that the philosophies of utilitarianism and of deontology sort of reflect this. They're very systematic, and they produce moral injunctions that leave a bad taste in most people's mouths. Much of his talk concerned the relationship between morality and the sense perception of taste as a metaphor, and morality being much like taste. Again, can't recommend highly enough that people go and listen to that full talk. It's very illuminating. But the point in bringing up Bentham and Kant in a conversation about whether or not you can be moral without God is that Christian moral ontology is like this as well. It is this linguistic system that takes humans and human empathy out of the equation. This is a purely logical thing, and creates this rock solid system, supposedly, that that provides some sense of solace. Now, all this is doing, for the most part, in the realm of Christian moral ontology, is just renaming things. It says you can't have morality without God because God is morality. It's a tautology when you actually dig into it. Tautologies add nothing, and actually, Dilbert has recently been making fun of this, as far as ESG is concerned. Dogbert is renaming the black employee has identified as white as a prank, and Dogbert has been hired to fix things by renaming. And so he renames the black character as black, and then the black character says, I can re-identify as often as I like. Dogbert says he gets paid by the hour, and the problem continues. But anyways, the just renaming things and saying, well, you can't be good without God because God is goodness, is removing any addition that God might have to the question. You can add any number of words and make those new additional words necessary for the functioning of an existing system by defining them as such. But insofar as it adds some kind of solace, some kind of psychological comfort to have the sensation of a rock solid, logical backing for one's moral system. We see the kind of spirit of autism emerging. This is something that is separated from the real physical world. It exists in a spiritual plane of abstractions. God, his kingdom is not of this world. His very existence is, very hidden from us. And utilitarianism is, at least in principle, applicable, but it runs into this quantity problem. How do you quantify utility of unlike things? So it's very like this could definitely work in theory, but there's no actual way to apply the theory in a meaningful way. At least as soon as you do, you run into problems. And the same thing with problem comes with deontology. They all feel very solid in the abstract, and that abstract solidity sort of evaporates when it hits the messiness of the real world. Which the messiness of the real world that autistic people who have a difficult time navigating social cues and that kind of social messiness more generally of ordinary life are often fleeing from in the first place. I don't mean to imply by this that all Christians are autists. Far from it. Nor would I ever want to imply that all deontologists or all utilitarians are autists. That would be to misread the argument here. What's happening is that theories generated from autism are guiding non-autistic people astray. That's the problem, because our moral theories aren't matching real world, aren't matching reality. And Jonathan Haidt has this metaphor that he uses to describe this. He says, a human being is like a human rider on an elephant, where the human rider is the 1% of the brain that is a conscious agent that is making decisions. And the elephant is just the 99% of the unconscious actions and habits and the things you do when you're asleep and do without thinking and so forth are like this massive animal that this rider is trying to control. And he says, basically, these autistic moral theories are like manuals for elephant riders. It has very little to do with the elephant. It just tells the rider how you should theoretically, where you should take this elephant. And so then the rider sits on top of this elephant, and the elephant is doing what it's like, and the rider's sitting there with this manual trying to get it to go right, and it's not happening. And but the rider knows with certainty from this manual that at least I know what it should be doing, even if I can't quite get it to get there. And he contrasts this with virtue ethics, which I want to defend here as the not just an alternative, but really as the best moral system here. And he says virtue ethics are like having an elephant trainer that is training the elephant itself and not just the rider. And it works on building habits and excellences in your life more holistically. And I want to read this quote. Actually, I know I've recommended this this talk several times, but it's worth exerting this section here, where he says, quote, "If you embrace virtue theory, you say goodbye to the dream of finding one principle, one foundation on which you can rest all of morality. You become a pluralist, as I've listed down there. And you also become a non-parsimonist. That is, of course, parsimony is always valuable in sciences, but my experience is that we've sort of elevated Occam's razor into Occam's chainsaw, which is, if you can possibly cut it away and still have it stand, do it. And I think, especially in moral psychology, we've grossly disfigured our field by trying to get everything down to one if we possibly can. So I think if you embrace virtue ethics, at least you put less of a value on parsimony than moral psychologists normally do. But what you get in return for this messiness is you get the payoff for being a naturalist. That is, you get a moral theory that fits with what we know about human nature elsewhere." End quote. And I think I couldn't summarize my own attraction to virtue ethics better. It actually fits descriptively with the world as we experience it. And it's especially annoying to hear the Christian moral ontologists say, their position is derived from truth when it, contradicts the observable truths that we know about human nature. But this is not just a problem of Christian moral ontology. It's a problem of autistic morality more generally, which begins with a system, a rational system, and judges human morality against the standard of this system, which was, conceived of in this rational way. And so, of course, it will inevitably find all normal humans to be grossly immoral because humans are not single-minded systems of that kind. We are organic. We are trying to negotiate a lot of different standards, not just one standard in our life. And we have to deal with trade-offs and things like that. So in a sense, from the orientation of its construction, one can say that virtue ethics is the only truly humanist branch of morality. And when I say humanist, I want to be clear that I don't mean humanist in the Marxist sense of humanizing. I would add that Marx inherited the amoral autism of Hegel, who is another fairly well-confirmed Asperger's case in history, but he was systematizing history and human nature rather than morality. So, anyways, I'm not trying to say here in any of this that autists or people with Asperger's syndrome are bad people. Far from it. Far from it. One of my favorite YouTubers, actually, just to bring up one example, a certain Dr. Randomer Cam, I am fairly convinced is on the spectrum, on the Asperger's spectrum, and is a very good person, is a very moral and decent person, at least so far as I can tell. What I am trying to say is that it might be a bad idea to construct your concept of morality on the opinions of autistic people who don't understand other people intuitively that well. You're going to get a stilted, artificial system that's going to maybe work in some cases, but fall short in any context, and in fact lead you very far astray in any context that was not thought of in the design of your system, whether that's utilitarianism or Jesus or whatever. So who do we look to for how to live then? Who do we look to as guides for right action? Well, to go to the author of virtue ethics, arguably, at least in the West, Aristotle says, find the people that you admire. Find the people that you look up to and that emanate excellence and joy and goodness in what they do. And figure out how to emulate them. We're not even saying emulate Aristotle per se. We don't know really enough about him to emulate him in that way, and his context is different than ours anyways. So the virtue ethics of Aristotle wouldn't apply to us even if we could emulate him. But it's at least a starting point. It's a path. Find people who you admire, who are living good lives that stick out to you as good lives, and follow their example, at least as a starting point. And this isn't something you can figure out with an equation. And in fact, the desire to find some German best practice system for figuring out how to do this is kind of a symptom of the problem we're trying to avoid in the first place. You have to begin with your intuition. You have to have a taste for what goodness is, and to trust your own judgment in following what the good in life actually looks like. So I think I want to before I guess by way of conclusion, I want to take a step back here and return to Christianity for a second. When I say, yes, you can be moral without God, I'm not trying to dunk on Christianity or on Christians, with a few exceptions here. I am of the opinion that real Christianity, authentic Christianity, is not autistic. In fact, real Christianity is almost anti-autistic. It is anti-systematizing. Jesus very much opposed to legalism and said, the point of right action here in this world is not about following the law per se, but about developing the correct heart, developing the correct relationship with God and getting your heart in the right place. And whatever actions you do from that relationship is going to be right, whether it follows the law or not. Historically, Christians were often very amenable to laws and also very quick to break the laws. The law had no relationship with their morality, although they were sort of de facto respectful of it in most cases. And of course, Jesus also taught compassion and mercy and forgiveness, especially towards the poor. This is a high sympathy, low systematizing ethical standard established by Christianity. But they don't talk about morality in that way. They don't talk about morality in a how can you be moral kind of way. They give you guides to life, but a lot of that is not judging others and whatever. But the reason they don't talk about morality is that morality, as in terms of actions here on this earth, isn't the point of Christianity. The point of Christianity is about your relationship with God in the hereafter. So if you are getting caught up in, but how could people be moral? How could they know not to steal without this transcendent standard? They are missing the point entirely. Their spirit is not in the right place because their mind and their attention is literally in the wrong kingdom. If you're concerned about theft and right action of other people on earth, your head's in the wrong place within the Christian framework. So real Christianity actually in this conversation is, it's not quite virtue ethics, but it's much closer to virtue ethics actually than this sort of autistic moral ontology that begins with this circular definition game of, well, God is goodness itself, so you can't have goodness without God, and blah blah blah. I'm going to try to give Christianity some credit here and say that's more of a modern apologetics thing built on some older thinkers. It's not like Augustine and Aquinas had no hand in that kind of thought, but it is the way it's expressed a lot of times in debates is does have this autistic moral quality that we also see in utilitarianism and deontology, which begs the question, perhaps morality might even be the wrong term. Talking about, but how will we be moral, might be, even from a secular perspective, putting your eyes on the wrong prize. We might put ourselves on better footing and on a more desirable trail with better scenic views and better company by shifting our sights from morality to virtue and to excellence, which is not just more actionable, but is, when done well, experienced as moral virtues by others around us, but also maybe avoids some of the moral masturbation that comes with talking about morality too much. So I think I can close there. It's a good 30-minute conversation about the superiority of virtue ethics and the problems with autistic morality. I'm sure this won't be the end of this conversation, but it's a good starting point, and I encourage everyone to read not just Aristotle and Jonathan Haidt, but all the other ones as well. It's a fantastic subject to explore and can, in my opinion, improve all of our lives tremendously. So anyways, thanks for listening.